I thank the honourable member for that. He talks about me keeping referring to. In fact, I've referred to it once, and that was in response to the gentleman behind me. So, you know, I do... Of course I will.
I find it fascinating that not only do members opposite want to defend this sort of completely outdated and barbaric practice of trophy hunting, but they also want to defend the procedure by which a few hereditary peers elect amongst themselves, with not a member of the public having any say in the matter. Could I also help my honourable friend by saying, of course, in the last session of Parliament, the bill here was introduced by a Conservative member of Parliament. Indeed, there was a Conservative member of the House of Lords who was going to take up that bill. Someone else shot in and grabbed it beforehand with a bit of sleight of hand. If he wants to defend that sort of jiggery-pokery, he's welcome to.
Order. And I'm just quite anxious that we come back to the bill as opposed to what might be a later bill in the House, which is about hereditary peers. Ruth Jones.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for clarifying that. But I do thank the member behind me for clarifying the situation that happened there, and I will move on. Because this bill will prohibit the bringing into Great Britain hunting trophies from the species listed in Annex A, being the most endangered species, or Annex B, being species threatened by commercial trade, of the Principal Wildlife Trade Regulation. These lists largely correspond to the equivalent list in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, an important international agreement protecting endangered plants and animals that the UK is a party to. The bill also creates an advisory board on hunting trophies, as the honourable members opposite highlighted earlier, which will advise the Secretary of State on any issues relating to the legislation or any matter relating to the import to Great Britain of hunting trophies derived from species which are or are likely to become endangered. I cannot emphasise how crucial this legislation is. Trophy hunting is not only barbaric, it is wholly unnecessary. In this country, as in most countries, we have long recognised that animals should not be subjected to unnecessary suffering. This principle is reflected domestically in our Animal Welfare Act 2006 and aligns with our understanding supported by animal welfare science and also enshrined in legislation. Animals are sentient beings. As sentient beings, animals deserve to be treated with dignity and humanity. But there's nothing dignified or humane about the sport of trophy hunting. It involves killing innocent animals for the sole purpose of turning their bodies into trophies. These animals often experience immense pain, fear and distress in the moments before they die. Some may be shot by inexperienced hunters using less efficient weapons like crossbows or spears, which do not deliver rapid death. And we saw this with Cecil the lion in 2015, who suffered for several hours following his wounding by crossbow in a beautiful part of southern Africa before he was finally put out of his misery. His death, quite rightly, caused outrage around the world, including right here in Britain. Other practices that hunting trophy can involve raise further welfare concerns, and I was horrified to learn of the practice of canned hunting, or the captive wildlife farming of animals for hunting. This practice often involves inflicting extremely poor welfare conditions on the captive wild animals, mostly lions, who may have to suffer from unsatisfactory enclosures, a lack of enrichment and insufficient provision of shelter and vet treatment, all so that part of their body may eventually become somebody's trophy. And let's not forget the negative impact that trophy hunting can have on other animals as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, such as the harm to offspring who may be unable to survive on their own after their parent is left for dead. And this was highlighted again earlier, and also the weakening of the gene pool, again highlighted earlier. These are important factors to consider. Trophy hunting can also have a negative impact on wildlife. Trophy hunters tend to target some of the world's most iconic animals, including endangered wild animal species such as lions, polar bears, giraffes and rhinos. These hunters selfishly kill these vulnerable animals so they can display their body parts as some sort of perverse prize. World Animal Protection notes that British hunters have brought home approximately 25,000 hunting trophies since the 1980s, and approximately 5,000 of these came from species which were at risk of extinction. The public are right to find this absolutely abhorrent and want to increase the protection afforded to these species who are already under pressure from habitat loss, climate change, poaching and illegal wildlife trade by passing this important legislation. And the Honourable Member for Canterbury outlined so eloquently earlier on these issues. Because let's not forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, how unnecessary these horrors really are. Compared with overall revenue that local economies gain from tourism, income from trophy hunting income is so insignificant. A 2017 report by The Economist at Large analysing 8 African countries found that while overall tourism was between 2.8 and 5.1% of GDP in the 8 studied countries, the total economic contribution of trophy hunters was at most about 0.03% of GDP, in stark contrast to the claims made by the honourable members opposite. We also know that there are more ethical and sustainable alternatives to trophy hunting for conservation. And I note a recent study which showed that 84% of previous or potential tourists, including those visiting from within Africa to South Africa, would be willing to pay a daily lion protection fee for wildlife conservation. Similarly, photographic safaris, which, as the Born Free Foundation puts it, involves shooting an animal with a camera rather than a gun, is another welfare-friendly alternative to hunting trophies. These alternative activities have the potential to generate income equalling or even exceeding the income currently generated from trophy hunting, without causing pain and suffering to wild animals, as the Honourable Member for Eltham highlighted in his amazing experience he had on his photographic safari. The idea that this country should be supporting efforts globally to promote humane tourism is also consistent with recent legislation passed in this House, the Animals Low Welfare Activities Abroad Act 2023. However, I note that the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is yet to even consult on the activity regulations which are necessary in order for this legislation to have any impact, or to give any indication as to when such consultation will begin. And I would encourage him to do so as a matter of urgency, because wild animals deserve protection, and this requires regulatory action. But as with so many animal welfare issues, this Conservative government is letting animals and the public down by failing to act. Because as a Shadow Secretary of State, my friend from Croydon North pointed out last Friday, when another private member's bill containing a broken Conservative Party promise was before this House, there is a rather extraordinary number of animal welfare pledges made by this government which have been completely abandoned. The government likes to tell the public that it has progressed world-leading animal welfare commitments, but compassion in rural farming ranks the UK only 9th out of European countries by the percentage of cage-free farm animals, trailing Luxembourg, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, Slovenia, Denmark and Belgium. So, of course, while our government has announced support for the private member's bill on animal welfare issues that were put forward by its backbencher MPs after the government abandoned the Kept Animals Bill, this is not leadership. And I would gently say to the Minister, if the government really cared about animals and if it really wished to honour the enormous public interest in passing strong laws for animals, it will be putting forward its own promised measures itself. So until it does so, we on this side will keep reminding this government of its broken promises, and we'll keep putting forward private members' bill like this one today, which we hope will become law as soon as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen in the House here today a near unanimous show of support. This is not racist colonial legislation. This is UK law governing what comes into the UK. That is our right, and this bill seeks to exercise this. So let's get on with it and let's get it done. Thank you.
Minister Rebecca.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, there are very many on both sides of the House who have been eagerly awaiting the passing of this piece of legislation, and also many outside campaigners who've worked tirelessly on this issue, and many of our constituents. I've had many emails myself in Taunton Dean on this. So I want to thank the Honourable Member from Waverley for introducing this bill, and Worley, apologies, for introducing this bill, and all those who have taken part, but not least, of course, my honourable friend from Crawley, who did such a sterling job just 1 year ago. We had a lively debate then, I think he will agree, and we've had another similarly lively debate today. And so I wanted to just list some of the colleagues who have spoken so eloquently on both sides. We've had the honourable member from East Worthing and Shoreham on his photography issue, which was such a well-made point about taking photographs of these wonderful creatures. Chipping Barnet, Watford. We have also had Suffolk Coastal. So input from all those on interventions, but also some really moving speeches, particularly from my honourable friend from Crawley, and we've had many opposition speakers, of course, joining in as well. It's clear, obviously, still that the hunting trophy idea continues to divide opinion. We've actually witnessed some of that today from our honourable friends from Christchurch and North Herefordshire. There's disagreement over the scientific, social, economic, moral, ethical rationale for trophy hunting, and that will no doubt continue for some time. And there are those who point to the evidence about the potential benefits of well-managed hunting. We did hear a great deal about that from my honourable friend from North Herefordshire. But we've also heard on the other side of the evidence of harm on poor practice. But what I really wanted to stress today is the critical thing is we are actually facing a triple planetary crisis. We have biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution, and those are the greatest threats that we are facing globally. And as the Nature Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is in my inbox every day, and I am only too aware of the threats on all those things and how we need to tackle them. And about 1 million animal and plant species are facing extinction. Many of those things have occurred in really recent time, in our lifetime, and the abundance and the diversity and connectivity of species is declining faster than at any time in human history, and this includes species targeted for trophy hunting. And we all know, and we all love them: elephants, rhinos, lions, leopards, polar bears, just to name a small handful. And there are those who argue that banning the import of trophies from these animals won't do anything to improve their conservation status, and I'm certainly listening to my honourable friends, but the question we've got to ask ourselves is whether the import into Great Britain of trophies from endangered animals helps tackle biodiversity loss. Does this trade really help secure a sustainable future for species on the brink of extinction? And many animals are under terrible threat anyway because their habitats are shrinking, and that's for a range of reasons, social, economic, but certainly climate change is all part of that. And ultimately, the aim of this bill is to ensure that imports of hunting trophies to Great Britain are not putting additional pressure on already threatened species. That is what should concentrate our minds. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am pleased to confirm that Government will be supporting this bill, and in doing so we will signal our continued determination to fulfil our manifesto commitment in this regard. And I've heard arguments that the ban will have implications for local communities and conservation efforts globally, and that is definitely something that we've got to consider very carefully, and we must be alive to the unintended consequences. However, this bill is about imports to Great Britain. Many have referred to that earlier in the debate. My right honourable friend from Suffolk Coastal reminded us of that. And this is about listening to the British public. There is clear, strong and consistent messaging that we need to bring an end to the import of endangered animals taken for the purpose of hunting trophies. And indeed, the winds of change are blowing us in this direction. A number of countries have already put these restrictions in place. So I'm actually not going to take any interventions because so many interventions were taken already, and we do not want to restrict the ULEZ bill. I will refer to some of these points he has rightly raised, though, in just a moment. It's obviously important then to recognise that the import ban, it won't prevent a UK resident or citizen from participating in hunting whilst they are overseas. Trophy hunting can and will continue around the world. and it's right that each country should be able to decide how best to manage its own wildlife. This bill does not change that, and this was actually highlighted by my honourable friend from North Herefordshire and my honourable friend from Christchurch, vociferously, but we're not preventing that. So I think that has to be remembered, and there have actually been regular opportunities for any countries all around the world on both sides of this debate to discuss this whole issue and raise their points. And indeed, we've had letters from the President of Botswana and Namibia, which the High Commissioner was written to just yesterday. So it's really important we keep in mind contribution the UK trade in hunting trophy makes. Annual imports of hunting trophies in the UK are very few in number. It's on average 73 per year over the last 10 years. But even so, it is essential that we do our part to ensure that communities around the world can properly benefit from conserving the wildlife that they live alongside. And this was reflected during agreement on our hugely important global biodiversity framework. And there's now very strong and essential focus on how we as a global community finance biodiversity conservation and restoration work. I know that members in this House know just how much this government is doing on that front with our huge £93 million Darwin initiative, our £30 million Darwin Plus initiative, and all of that focuses on biodiversity and conservation, but working with locals and Indigenous peoples. So penultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm just going to turn to the bill and just run through some of what it contains. The bill will ban the import of hunting trophies for specific species with the explicit aim of ensuring that imports to Great Britain are not placing unnecessary pressure on species that are already at risk. For these species, an import ban without exemptions will be the most effective, providing clarity and addressing conservation concerns arising from trophy hunting. Clauses 1 and 2 of the bill together make provision for the import ban. It will cover trophies brought into Great Britain from animals hunted after this legislation comes into force. There are strict, clear lines about anything that's happened before that. And the definition of a hunting trophy in Clause 1 is the body of an animal or a readily recognisable part or derivative of an animal that is obtained through hunting for the hunter's personal use. This is how hunting trophies are defined in our current controls under CITES. Clause 2 applies the import ban to all species listed in Annex A and B of the Wildlife Trade Regulations. The Wildlife Trade Regulations implement the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, in Great Britain, and Annexes A and B are broadly equivalent to Appendix 1 and 2 of that convention and include species that the global community agreed to protect through trade restrictions due to their conservation status. They cover a great number of species threatened by international trade, such as big cats, all bears, all primates, hippos, rhinos and elephants. And as a result, the bill will end the permit system for imports of hunting trophies from this species. There will be no provision for exemptions to the import plan. Clause 3 is about movements from Northern Ireland. It really clearly states that from the import ban would not apply in relation to removal qualifying Northern Ireland goods from Northern Ireland in Great Britain. Clause 4, which was raised by the Honourable Member from Christchurch, establishes an advisory board on hunting trophies. The role of the advisory board is to advise on any questions relating to the Act referred to by the Secretary of State. And Clause 5 simply covers extent, application, commencement and short title. So, in summary, just very quickly on the impact assessment, as I didn't allow any inventions, we heard some views about that impact assessment and what the government was going to do about that. But actually there are two sides to that as well. The impact assessment did present both sides of the debate, but it also highlighted that trophy hunting can lead to population declines and overhunting threatens over 30% of endangered mammal species, according to IUCN. It also noted trophy hunting quotas are reliant on rather inappropriate, unscientific or excessive quotas and over-reliance on opinions. And management is also based on poor quality data. Speaker. Similarly, a report by the University of Oxford found damaging effects of unsustainable trophy hunting can extend beyond hunting areas. So I hope that's answered some of the questions, Madam Deputy Speaker. This has been a very positive and lively debate on both sides of the House. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this back to this House and reconfirm that the Government is fully committed to supporting the bill.
With the leave of the House, in that case I will not be calling John Speller to wind up, but we'll move straight to the question. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby. Question is that the bill be now read a second time, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Mark Fletcher and Mike Wood. Tell us for the noes, Sir Bill Wiggin and Sir Christopher Chope. the doors. Investigate what the delay is in the lobby, please. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 49. The noes to the left, 0.
Yeah.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 49. The noes to the left, 0. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to the second bill of the day.
Greater London Low Emission Zone Charging Amendment Bill, second reading.
Gareth Johnson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. Madam Deputy Speaker, I brought in this bill to overturn the expansion of the ULEZ scheme simply because it is a cruel form of taxation. It's particularly cruel. It's particularly cruel on the poorest in society.
Absolutely.
Those people who have an old motor vehicle. Those people who have an old motor vehicle who cannot afford to upgrade it with a scrappage scheme or without a scrappage scheme. They cannot afford to upgrade it and therefore are hit heavily by this scheme. It's also very unfair on businesses, particularly in outer London, who lose out on the business they otherwise would have got from people in the neighbouring counties coming into outer London to assist their businesses by purchasing their goods.
Exactly like Harlow.
It's unfair on those people.
Exactly, it's terrible.
It's also unfair on those people who live outside of London, because they have no say on who the London mayor
No say
is.
at all. It's disgraceful.
The border between London and the home counties is not neat. People in my constituency live in Kent, yet have to go into London just to exit their road. The border straddles some roads. This is a border that cannot be avoided by people, and the Mayor of London knows this.
He does. He does. Disgraceful.
Yes, of course.
My honourable friend and parliamentary neighbour is making a very impressive start to his speech on this bill, but he and I share roads in Crayford and Dartford where it's different sides of the road depend on what sort of tax that people have to pay, because some people come in from Dartford regularly to Bexley Heath and Crayford as gardeners, as plumbers, all sorts of people, and they cannot afford this. This is so unfair, particularly as it wasn't in the manifesto of the mayor when he was last elected.
Well said.
My friend from Bexley Heath and Crayford makes an absolutely valid point. And I'd go further, actually. I'd say if you think about police officers in the Metropolitan Police area, something like 50% of those police officers live outside of London and commute in. And it's probably a similar sort of percentage for all emergency workers. These are the people that Londoners rely on most. These are the people that are vital for Londoners. And yet they're being hit if their vehicle is not ULEZ compliant with £12.50 every single time they go to work. And worse than that, if they're doing a night shift, they have to pay on the way in and on the way out again. At 3 o'clock in the morning, there may be no public transport. And so therefore, to hit emergency workers by £25 just for doing a night shift is totally and utterly wrong. Yes, of course.
My honourable friend's making a great speech and he knows he has my full support on this issue. But does he agree with me that today we will see whose side the Labour Party are on? Are they going to talk this bill out, or are they going to back those emergency service workers and people in Bexley that want rid of the ULEZ?
Let's back hard-working people.
Well, I pay tribute to the work that my friend from Old Bexley and Sidcup has carried out on this scheme.
It's not so funny, they're laughing.
Absolutely right. We will see today whether they're in favour of the workers or they're in favour of
Sadiq Khan. Well, they think ULEZ is funny for hard-working people.
And yes, I will.
Thank the member for giving way, and I'm following his arguments with interest. In Bristol, we've had the first year of a clean air zone, which was actually imposed on us. It was a requirement by the then Secretary of State at DEFRA, the Right Honourable Member for Suffolk Coastal, because the government had been taken to court by Client Earth for being in breach of air pollution limits. They therefore insisted that we did this in Bristol, and if I get a chance to speak, I will come on to how successful it was. But that seems slightly at odds with what the argument that the Honourable Member's making now, that in terms of local autonomy.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her intervention, because it gives me the opportunity to actually smash this myth that the expansion of the ULEZ scheme has got anything to do with air pollution whatsoever. It has not. if it was about air pollution, the Mayor of London would ban these vehicles from going into London.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't want to ban them, he wants to make money out of them. If
yeah, exactly. Our workers. Who have got no money.
Those people driving those motor vehicles, give the Mayor of London £12.50. They can drive all day long in London. He does not give a damn. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with air pollution. And if you take my constituency in Dartford, for example, many people who previously used the Blackwall Tunnel with ULEZ non-compliant vehicles are now having to go and use the Dartford crossing to get across the Thames. It is adding to pollution in areas like Dartford, not removing it.
Exactly.
Thank you to my friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that the letter that I wrote and signed by many members on the bench today, including himself, in 2021 when Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, wanted to put a charge, a border tax as I called it, on people driving into London, which had nothing to do with the environment at that time, when he failed with that, after the pressure that was put on, shock horror, a little bit later, he puts the same thing out, but with an environmental taint to it. I think it's greenwashing, and actually it's just making the people who work so hard in places like Watford pay extra just to go to work.
Well said. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to the work that he's carried out over this issue for some time. And he's absolutely right. The approach to the border tax, as the honourable member for Watford called it, exactly highlights the fact that the Mayor of London was hell-bent on bringing in a system whereby he could make money out of cars. He wanted to make it out of every car originally. When he was stopped from doing that, he now wants to make it out of certain cars only, because that was his B plan, if you like. And yes.
My constituents in Christchurch are equally adversely affected and will benefit from his bill. But can he answer the question as to why the government itself didn't use the powers available to it to ban this extension of ULEZ?
I'm grateful to my friend from Christchurch for intervening. As the law stands at the moment, the government does not have the power to overturn the ULEZ expansion. It's consequently, I've introduced this bill which would give the government the power to overturn.
Very good bill too.
And I'm really grateful to the Minister for his work and efforts on this. I'm really grateful for the fact that the government is now supporting this bill, and I hope, therefore, it will be successful as a consequence. Because we've heard about the scrappage scheme, but this scrappage scheme, if you actually look into it, is up to £2,000 per vehicle. Up to £2,000. Good luck getting a vehicle that's ULEZ compliant for up to £2,000. And we're also hearing that people are finding it very, very difficult to actually get their £2,000 or up to £2,000 from TfL, and there's been a lot of delays in that regard. You know, and the people have said, well, why don't we expand the scrappage scheme right down to, to Dartford and beyond? Well, where do you draw the line if you're going to increase the scrappage area? You go to the Midlands, go down to the West Country. It could cost this country billions and billions of pounds. And billions of pounds it would cost the taxpayers in this country simply because the Mayor of London is unable to organise his finances.
Let me give way. I strongly support his bill. This is an unjust charge, and will he agree with me that some of the victims of this charge are local high street businesses in outer London, because their customers from beyond the London border are reluctant to come in because they may have to pay this charge.
And in Harlow. And I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, who's been a real champion of this issue for her constituents in Barnet, and she's absolutely right. The dry cleaners, the fish and chip shops, the sweet shops and so on, that people like to travel to from outside of London into London to use, that no longer happens if their vehicle is not ULEZ compliant. Yes, of course.
To the Honourable Gentleman, I've been listening to him very, very, very carefully, and he keeps talking about money making as if someone's making a profit here. This is money that goes to London services, and he is a Dartford MP outside of London. How did he suggest to my constituents who are writing to me in large numbers about the state of the potholes on our road, how we in London afford to pay for his constituents to drive through places like my constituency on the way to the Blackwall Tunnel? Because what he's trying to do is deny Londoners the right to have decent roads.
I have to say, I'm rather surprised that the Honourable Member for Eltham is standing up supporting what the Mayor of London has done with the ULEZ scheme. Actually, I think if he looked at his inbox carefully, most of his constituents don't like the fact particularly the poorest in his constituency, don't like the fact that they're having to pay £12.50 just for using their motor vehicles. So I don't feel that actually is something that he will have his constituents on. Okay, I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I'm a bit concerned he's been looking into my emails because I think I'll have a word with the parliamentary estate about that. But actually, perhaps the reason I'm standing up here is because there aren't that many people who are contacting me about ULEZ since it has been introduced. And what they are contacting me about is the state of our roads. And the potholes on our roads, they're symbolic of the disastrous management of our public services we've had from the Conservatives over the last 14 years. And everyone is complaining about them.
Maybe then the honourable member has this oasis in South London where everyone around the outside of it hates the ULEZ scheme, and in Eltham they love it. But I'd be very, very surprised. And I would gently remind the honourable gentleman that most of the roads in Eltham are actually maintained by the Labour Council of Greenwich. So I do think that actually they should take their share of responsibility for the state of the roads in Eltham too. But I'll move on, because this all was borne out not just from the border charge that my honourable friend from Watford mentioned, but also consultation that was launched by the Mayor of London. Consultation that showed quite clearly that people rejected it. They did not want it. That was absolutely clear. There was a question mark over how that consultation was handled, but what was absolutely clear was that the majority of people did not want it, and yet he still went ahead with it. So we look at his manifesto when he stood to be London Mayor. In his manifesto, there was no mention of the fact that he wanted to expand the ULEZ scheme right out to the border. So he has no mandate from his manifesto either. We look at his transport plan as it was previously. That had no mention of the fact that he wanted to expand the ULEZ scheme right out to the outside of London. And so the Mayor of London does not have a mandate to have carried out the expansion of the ULEZ scheme.
There's no mandate at all.
I've heard people say, well, this is interfering with devolution. It's undermining devolution. That's what allegations. There we are. There is allegation there. They're saying it's undermining devolution.
They don't care about the poor.
I would say the opposite. It is the actions of the London Mayor that is actually undermining devolution. The whole point of devolution, the whole point is to bequeath powers to make laws to elected mayors in this example. And for those elected mayors to use those powers for those people that he represents. It is not devolution when you carry out those powers that have such a profound impact on people that do not come under your particular area. If you live in Dartford, for example, you have a huge impact on your lives carried out by the Mayor of London, yet you do not have the power to vote him in or vote him out. It is literally taxation without representation or any kind of accountability whatsoever. It is, frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, devolution at its worst, and that's why it is absolutely right that central government intervenes over this matter, because it is taking the devolved powers way beyond that which was intended and impacting people who do not have a vote on that person. And I'll make one prediction. One prediction that this is the beginning, Madam Deputy Speaker, and not the end. Come the London mayoral elections in May, if Sadiq Khan wins, as sure as night follows day, he will change the criteria of those vehicles that are ULEZ compliant or not. Until we will get to a stage where every single petrol car, every single diesel car is impacted by this expansion. I think people watching this at home, if they've got nothing better to do on a Friday afternoon, people watching this at home, sitting pretty, thinking, this doesn't affect me because my car's ULEZ compliant. It's nothing to do with me. This is for people who have a car that's not ULEZ compliant. I say be very, very aware of what happens at the mayoral elections. Because as sure as night follows day, the Mayor of London will change the goalposts over this and ensure that all motor vehicles will be hit by the ULEZ expansion.
Of course they will.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for giving way. On that exact point, does he agree with me that it's very clear that what the Mayor of London says and what the Mayor of London does are very different? And he previously ruled out expanding ULEZ, and then he done it.
Says it all.
Absolutely right. And this has actually been typical of what's happened in this whole debate. Go back to July of last year. The leader of the Labour Party said that ULEZ expansion was a wonderful thing. Come the by-election in Uxbridge, He said, oh no, we've got to think again over this one, not quite sure if we got this one right. Come look, just this week, he said the ULEZ expansion was a great thing. We've had enormous dithering from the leader of the Labour Party over this very issue, and therefore the Mayor of London is taking full advantage of that fact. So we had a Westminster Hall debate. Many of my colleagues were present for that. Unfortunately, not a single Labour backbencher turned up to that debate.
Well, they don't care about the working man or woman.
And I think it highlights the sort of mismanagement that's taken place over this whole issue by the Labour Party. And so, if I could finish on this one point, we have the mayoral elections obviously coming up in May, Madam Deputy Mayor, as I'm sure you're aware. The Conservative Party candidate Susan Hall, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do apologise. We have a Conservative Party candidate, Susan Hall, who has pledged that if she is made the Mayor of London, she will overturn the ULEZ expansion from day one. So therefore, the most effective, quickest way of actually overturning the ULEZ expansion is to vote for Susan Hall at those mayoral elections. If we do that, or if my bill is successful, we will end what is a cruel form of taxation against many people who have no say over who the London mayor is. It is an attack on the poorest in society. Those who can least afford to pay it the most are those people who are being hit the hardest. And I can't wait to see the back of it.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak in opposition to the bill before us today for 3 key reasons. Firstly, because it represents an attack on devolution. Secondly, because it ignores the urgent and important need to tackle poor air quality, not just here in London, but in towns and cities across our country. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, you'd be forgiven for forgetting about this urgent public health issue, because the honourable member opposite barely mentioned it in his introduction of this bill, and yet it goes to the very heart of what the ultra-low emission zone is about. It is about trying to tackle something which we know is a significant problem here in London and in towns and cities across the country. And of course, it isn't just a problem in city centres. When I think of my own city and the heat map of where there are poor air quality issues, it isn't just in the city centre. Actually, it's often in the ring road where there are particular issues. And so it is an issue in outer London, just as it was in inner London. And thirdly, I think because it is using what is a serious public health issue for purely party political point scoring. So let me begin, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the issue of devolution. It would be nice if I could hear myself speak. I think it's worth remembering that the ultra-low emission zone and indeed emission charging zones are a Tory policy. They were pushed onto local government by a Tory government and first championed here in London by a Tory mayor. But you wouldn't know that to listen to the interventions opposite. Now, the Mayor of London has statutory obligations in relation to air quality across the Greater London area. He has a right, indeed a duty, to introduce measures to meet the national air quality targets set by central government. The whole purpose of devolution is for local people to determine the policies that are needed for their area. Now, the government has set the targets for air pollution, for air quality, I should say. It is for democratically elected mayors and local authorities to run their cities or their counties in the way that works best for their area. Now, I know that that can be controversial. My city is unique, actually, in this country, of having the workplace parking levy. And I wouldn't for one moment say that that has not been controversial. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was incredibly controversial when it was first introduced.
which is more than 10 years ago now. And at the time, obviously, you'll remember that under a previous Conservative-led government, there was a huge problem in terms of austerity, and people were really feeling the impacts of that. And so its introduction was actually delayed by a year. But it was about both discouraging people from driving into the city, and it provided an income stream which could be used to improve alternatives to driving, to invest in public transport. And it's been incredibly successful doing that, because Nottingham is one of the cities that hasn't been forced to introduce a charging clean air zone, because the work that they have done to improve public transport, in part funded by that workplace parking levy, has led to that situation. Now, the Mayor of London expanded the ULEZ in August 2023 because toxic air pollution is a public health crisis. Yeah. He is acting to tackle the crisis of poor air quality. And let me remind honourable members, poor air quality is linked to around 4,000 premature deaths per year in London. And it leads to children growing up with stunted lungs and contributes to people developing serious health problems, including asthma, heart disease and dementia. Now, I understand that the honourable member might not agree with the Mayor about the best way to tackle the issue of air pollution, but that is democracy. And I have to say, I will indeed give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful because she's developing a very powerful argument, and this is what the Conservatives have no answer to. What is it that they are going to put in place to deal with the health aspects of poor air quality? Yep. You know, the damage to children's development, people with COPD and other respiratory and coronary illnesses are adversely affected by this, and they are so desperate because they have nothing to offer the people of London that they are seeking to scaremonger about this charge. But they have no concern whatsoever for the health of those Londoners or those people in outer London, who are suffering most from air pollution.
Yeah. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I think that's absolutely right. And it was really telling when the honourable member began to talk about his mayoral candidate, that he didn't say anything about her plans to tackle the very serious issue of air pollution. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my friend for giving way. I think she hits on a blunter truth about this piece of legislation, because in 6 weeks' time, the constituents that we all have, whether they agree or not with the argument being made by the member opposite, whether they agree or not with the arguments around the importance of tackling air pollution, will have the opportunity to express an opinion at the ballot box in choosing who the London Mayor should be, who is overseeing this policy. So isn't really the message of this legislation that Conservative MPs have no confidence in their mayoral candidate being able to win that argument, or indeed doing anything in support of their policies? Isn't the message the reality of this, because they feel the need to intervene and usurp devolution, that nobody in London should even bother with the Conservative candidate because her own colleagues think she's incompetent?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I think she has hit the nail on the head. And progress is being achieved. The vast majority of cars, 19 out of 20 in Greater London, are compliant with ULEZ. And on these benches, we're pleased that Transport for London and the Mayor of London have decided to expand the scrappage scheme to support those struggling in the moment as a result of the Tory cost of living crisis. I give way to...
I'm listening with interest to the Honourable Lady's speech, and obviously the government supports this particular bill and the circumstances apply. But will she address the points that is fairly made about people outside a mayoral zone being affected and penalised by entering a mayoral zone when they didn't vote for that?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think, unusual as it would be for the Minister to intervene, I feel, but I think the point was made by my honourable friend, which is that when people from outside London drive into London, the costs of that in terms of health, in terms of the wear and tear on the roads, is borne by constituents here in London. And I don't think it's unreasonable for them to expect those who benefit from everything that London has to offer and from travelling into the centre and causing congestion and poor air quality follows the principle that the polluter pays, and that's a well-established principle. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
My honourable friend, give way. And it goes back to what I was saying about the fact that the government insisted that Bristol had a clean air zone. Obviously, that is going to have a significant impact on people, say, from Bath, who drive down through the A4 into my constituency, causing a huge amount of congestion and contributing to the air pollution. But that is basically how politics works. I entirely agree with what my honourable friend has said about it's about the duty of the local politicians is to look after the people in the patch they represent.
My honourable friend is exactly right. But I will come and address it further on in my speech, issues around how we best tackle the issue of air pollution and at the same time protect those who are impacted by this charge. But as I say, from August 21st last year, every Londoner with a non-compliant vehicle became eligible for a £2,000 grant to assist them in replacing their vehicle. Now, I understand that people have said, well, £2,000 is not enough, but that has been provided, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite central government providing no financial support to the Mayor of London. Of course, the government, if they are concerned, about the impact, if they are concerned about the impact of their clean air charging zones, they could have provided additional assistance to the Mayor. Now, I'm not giving way at the moment. Additional financial support they could have provided additional support in order to so that amount could be increased, and they chose not to. I'm proud that Labour is the party of devolution. It was Labour that created the mayoral model in London, created the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Parliament and the Northern Ireland Assembly, as well as always having...
The Honourable Lady is trying to make a speech. We've got a conversation going over the two front benches and rather a lot of shouting at the Honourable Lady. I think we need to listen to the Honourable Lady's speech with respect. Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, as well as always having regional and local decision-making and funding across England, I'm pleased that the next Labour government will build on that record. And indeed, Labour mayors across England are already showing how it's done, whether that's in Manchester or Liverpool or South Yorkshire or West Yorkshire, taking back control of buses, supporting new homes, reforming employment and skills. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very much looking forward to seeing Claire Ward elected as the first Mayor of the East Midlands on the 2nd of May. Sadly, whilst Labour is committed to more devolution, this bill shows that Tories are simply trying to roll it back. Yep. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to say a little more about the issue of air pollution, which, as I say, is at the heart of this bill, and about the strategies to tackle it. As I've already said, we know the problems that poor air quality causes. It affects our health, our environment, and as many as 40,000 people die prematurely each year as a result of poor air quality. The elderly, the unwell and the economically deprived are those most likely to be affected. The government's own estimates say that poor air quality costs the UK economy billions of pounds each year. And I think about my own constituency, and I think about the arguments we had about the workplace parking levy. And actually, lots of the people in the city don't pay workplace parking levy because they simply cannot afford to run a car at all. They are reliant on public transport. But we also know where the problem occurs. Key pollutants, including nitrogen dioxide and fine particulate matter, known as PM2.5, are found in many places, and too many air quality zones in the UK exceed legal limits. The World Health Organization tells us there is no safe level of exposure to fine particulate matter. And we know what causes poor air quality. It comes from several sources: industry, agriculture, homes, businesses, and yes, transport. Now, road transport is responsible for the vast majority of nitrogen oxide concentrations at places in the UK that exceed legal limits, with diesel engines a significant contributor. The number of cars and vans on our roads continues to rise, and congestion has worsened, which increases pollution in itself. Transport also generates a significant proportion of particulate matter from both combustion and wear on tyres and brake pads. Now, cleaner vehicles help to solve the problem, and we have made some progress, but not enough. And there are examples from across the country of the action that can be taken to tackle emissions. Low emission zones are only one tool in the toolbox, and it could well be said that they should be a last resort. Now, as I've said, in my own city, there has been considerable investment in public transport, paid in part by the proceeds from the workplace parking levy. We've had major extensions to our tram network, and Nottingham's municipal bus company introduced new biogas buses years ago, and they have just started the rollout of new electric vehicles. I'm really pleased to see that, and I wouldn't deny that they have had support from central government for some of that investment. For a number of years, the City Council has been operating an anti-idling campaign, and that mirrors similar action in other towns and cities across the UK. It's a multi-pronged approach, not one tool, but multiple tools to try to tackle what is a very serious public health issue. Now, I know that the Department for Transport has supported the development of low-emission buses and taxis, and that is a good thing, because tackling the issue of poor air quality should be about central government working with local councils, working with mayors, rather than dictating to them, as this bill seeks to do. They should be supporting and collaborating with them. And indeed, when I was preparing for today's debate, I went back to the report of 4 select committees back in 2018, which looked at this issue around improving air quality. And that was one of the things that those 4 cross-party select committees came together and recommended, that there should be collaboration and partnership between central government and local authorities and mayors. Because air pollution isn't a problem that can be fixed by central government or local government alone. They need to work together. Now, like the Mayor of London, local authorities are already responsible for meeting air quality targets, but they find it difficult to make changes, partly due to lack of resources, but partly because the changes needed are politically unpalatable, and that, I guess, is what has caused today's debate. And it is a while ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, but back in 2018, that joint report from 4 select committees on improving air quality called for ambitious, coordinated, cross-departmental action. Now, I'm sorry that in some respects the government have failed in this regard. They've prevaricated on removing the most polluting vehicles from our roads. At the time of the 2018 report, we were calling on them to have a more ambitious target for the removal of petrol and diesel cars. At the time, I think they were only committed to removing them by 2040. Now, first of all, they did commit to a more ambitious target to end the sale of petrol and diesel cars. But of course, more recently, they have rowed back from that target. And that in itself makes it more difficult to achieve the improvements that we know are needed. And we've also seen a decision to row back from the electrification of our railways. At the time that was done, it was in favour of bi-mode trains, and that has worrying implications for air quality, but also for carbon emissions and noise. Every time I go to St Pancras Station to catch my train home to Nottingham, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm standing on the platform and we have diesel trains because the railway is not electrified all the way to Nottingham. And I'm looking forward, frankly, to seeing new trains on the Midland Main Line next year, but they're only going to be bi-mode trains. So whilst they will be leaving St Pancras under electric power, which will improve air quality in central London, by the time they get to Nottingham, they'll be operating under diesel power, doing far less to improve air quality in our city. And I'm afraid that is the result of a decade of broken promises by successive Tory Prime Ministers who've paused and then cancelled electrification of the Midland Main Line, and we now know that electric trains won't reach Nottingham until at least the early 2030s. I've sometimes joked that I will be retired by the time that we get there, and I'm afraid that might be the case. Now, there is a danger that the government rely too heavily on new technologies to solve our air quality challenges, placing too much emphasis on cleaning up road vehicles and not enough on reducing the number of vehicles on our roads. Yep. Improving public transport and encouraging active travel should lie at the heart of any clean air strategy. And indeed, when we come to freight vehicles, obviously getting more freight off our roads and onto our railways would be very welcome. Taking many HGVs, which are often the most polluting vehicles, off our roads. Now, back in 2018, the 4 select committees concluded that the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Department for Transport should work closely with local authorities to ensure that councils introducing clean air zones received the support they need to implement complementary measures that encourage car drivers to switch to public transport and active travel, as well as increasing the take-up of electric vehicles. Now, of course, I understand that not every journey can be taken by public transport or on a bicycle or on foot, but if we can change a proportion of those journeys, we can make a real difference. Now, for a while, the party opposite seemed really interested in walking and cycling, and I can see the Minister with responsibility for walking and cycling sitting opposite, but he's not been terribly busy, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, at Transport Questions, there was not a single Conservative MP standing to ask a question about active travel, and it's really disappointing that they have scaled back their investment in that regard. Now, investment in low-emission buses is great, but the value of such investment is magnified if local authorities also take steps to encourage motorists to opt for buses rather than making journeys by car. And I understand the arguments that the Honourable Member who put forward this bill was making, that people can continue to drive. But of course, it's a disincentive if there is a charge, and that is partly how it operates. We know that the pandemic had a huge impact on public transport usage, both here in London and across the country. And actually, I pay tribute to the government for their £2 bus fare. That's been a really welcome initiative. But of course, here in London, the Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has also taken action, both to protect Londoners from the Tory cost of living crisis and to encourage more people to travel by public transport, introducing the hopper fare on buses and freezing fares in 5 out of 8 years. But without action on modal shift, efforts to tackle congestion or improve air quality are less likely to succeed. Many of the policies needed to tackle urban congestion could also help to improve air quality, and tackling both could have a positive effect on both the local and the national economy. And a significant increase in active travel could make a difference, not just to policies around air quality, but also to tackling obesity, improving mental health and building better communities. I will give it.
I thank Ms. McAway. She's making an incredibly powerful case as to why it should be a priority for all of us, because ultimately air quality is a social justice issue. However rich or poor you are, we are all breathing the same air. Indeed, I would suggest to anybody who lives in London, the case for tackling air quality is best experienced when you leave London for a couple of days and frankly blow your nose and you realise what you've been breathing in. That affects everybody. So she's absolutely right that we need to tackle it at a national as well as a local level. But does she agree with me that unless the Conservatives come up with an alternative plan, she is condemning in particular the poorest in our communities to the worst health outcomes?
My honourable friend again makes a very, very important point. And in the absence of proper information about how a Conservative mayor would tackle the issue of air pollution, you know, I'd be very surprised if many people decide that that's the direction they want to go. Finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill is about party political point scoring. The government supports clean air zones. Indeed, it provided cash for scrappage schemes in Bristol, in Bath, in Sheffield, in Birmingham and Portsmouth and other areas of the country, but not in London. I wonder why that is. And of course, in towns and cities across England, not just in London, our constituents have faced 14 years of Tory economic failure. They can't afford another week, let alone more months or, heaven forbid, years of Tory government. Families are sick with anxiety as they endure this cost of living crisis, whilst their local services are under immense pressure. Now, when times are tough due to the Conservatives' economic failure, it's essential that we look at options for achieving clean air without disproportionately impacting people who are facing tough times. We must secure our economy. We must make it stronger by getting growth back on course, as the last Labour government did, instead of the anaemic situation that we have had under 14 years of the Tories. Of course, they don't want to hear it, do they? They really don't want to be reminded that growth was faster under a Labour government than it has been under 14 years of the Tories. And that it is the result of 14 years of Tory economic failure that leaves us in the position that we are, where everything is worse and everything is broken. It's by growing our economy that we'll provide sustainable long-term funding for councils and give local areas the tools and the stability that they need for growth as we push power, wealth and opportunity out of Westminster. Now, I will give way.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She's now been speaking for nearly half an hour, and it's obvious that both she and the Labour Party wish to talk out my bill to overturn the expansion of the ULEZ scheme. Can I ask her what her message is to a lady that I spoke to just recently in my constituency, who said that she couldn't go and visit her sister in Bexley, just a few miles away, because as she was a disabled person, she couldn't use public transport, she couldn't afford to upgrade her car and couldn't afford a taxi. That may not affect people in Nottingham South, but it does affect people in Dartford, and I'll be grateful if she could let me know what she feels is her message to that lady.
Look, of course, I absolutely understand that people are facing a cost of living crisis. I'm afraid that what the honourable member should have been explaining to that lady is why she is feeling so much worse off after 14 years of a Conservative government, rather than trying to, in some way, just pin it on a single issue affecting people. Actually, it's down to his government's failure, and he should take some responsibility for that. Now, I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way and for her excellent speech in support of our clean air, which is what this debate is about. What would she say to the many parents that I meet in my constituency who introduce me to children who have asthma, children who have asthma on a scale never had before, but whom, with the ULEZ and other measures, will see their children's health improving?
Hear, hear. Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I think she makes a really important point, which could be lost in this debate, which is this is about health. It is about the health of children. It is about the health of older people. It is, as my honourable friend said, about the health of some of the poorest in society who are most impacted by poor air quality. And that's what we should be talking about. That is what this debate should be about. I will give away.
I'm going to show friend, but very briefly, if it's not about health, which is what the claim is of the mover of this bill, why has the government supported charge zones in other cities?
Well, I think we will have to listen to the Minister for his answer on that. But it was very clear that the government wanted clean air charging zones. In fact, it was a requirement on cities that hadn't succeeded in meeting air quality targets through other measures. And I'm not going to apologise for speaking in this debate because, as I say, over a long period I've had an interest in this issue of air quality and I think the experience in our own city actually means that we have something to offer and something to share. But let me just turn finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the alternative, because the honourable member opposite didn't say much about alternatives, and I want to, because Labour does have a plan to support drivers. Labour will support drivers by focusing on the cost of living and on the infrastructure challenges that are real priorities for those households who have and use a car. And that probably includes most of us some of the time, even if we walk and cycle or use a bus most of the time. That includes working with the Competition and Markets Authority, working with the Financial Conduct Authority and industry on addressing the soaring costs of car insurance. Our plan to bring railways back into public hands and allow local authorities, all local authorities, to take back control of their bus services, something that London never had to put up with, frankly, because they never had their bus services deregulated as the rest of the country did. Those things have the capability to relieve congestion by improving the state of our public transport network. And I imagine other local authorities might like to follow Nottingham's lead in having a municipal bus company, which once again has been shown to be one of the best bus services in the entire country. I would say the best bus service in the entire country, thanks to Nottingham City Transport. A Labour government is committed to protecting our environment, to helping decarbonise the economy and ensuring we all have safe air to breathe. Labour would work with local authorities and mayoral combined authorities to support them to meet air quality targets in the ways that work best for their areas. We appreciate that emissions levels in different areas vary by the kind of industry and the economic activity in those areas, and we will work in partnership with local and regional governments, empowering them to protect and improve air quality whilst also fostering economic innovation and productivity. Labour would make clear that the government has a direct responsibility to work with all local authorities to avoid the need for charging clean air zones through the adoption of alternative air quality improvement methods, as I've talked about today: rerouting traffic, land management, speed limits, better public transport and better options to get freight off our roads and onto our railways. And that responsibility should also extend to helping to mitigate the impacts of any proposals that clears the strong thresholds set by government for a clean air zone. Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank you for having the opportunity to speak in this debate, and I do hope that honourable members will focus on that issue of air pollution and the need to take action in a variety of ways to tackle it. Thank you.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Sir David Evanet.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for Dartford, on his bill today, which I was delighted to be a co-sponsor of and to participate in this debate. I congratulate my honourable friend on his excellent, informative and constructive speech. And before I say anything else, I was rather disappointed on the member who I have a lot of respect for Nottingham South, when she didn't actually do much about ULEZ. She told us a tour of Nottingham and other parts of Labour Party policy, but what she didn't, and what she showed to me, is a total misunderstanding and never understanding outer London. No, I'm afraid to say, you can barrack me all you like, but she never had a view on outer London. Now, she also made a statement which was fundamentally untrue, saying that this government hadn't bailed out the Mayor of London. Well, Transport for London has been bailed out so many times in the course of the last few years, but she didn't say that. She glossed over the fact of the management of TfL. She also didn't come up with any facts or figures about how the ULEZ in inner London had reduced the level of pollution, because we still see huge pollution in inner London, even on the underground, which was something last year that came to our attention. Now, just a moment. No, I will just go. That honourable lady over there would not give way to me, so I'm certainly not going to give way to her. But also, I've not had the opportunity yet to start my speech. And I know the opposition members want to just delay everybody and anything, but I want to speak for my borough of Bexley. We had a long tour about Nottingham, but this ULEZ affects my constituency and my borough, not hers in Nottingham. And therefore, I think I should have a few minutes to get... Well, you didn't get up and ask to intervene, but the others did. However, the expansion of ULEZ is an issue that affects my area and surrounding areas very badly. By blindly copying the approach taken in central and inner London without properly assessing the implications for outer London or the neighbouring areas, this expansion has caused a range of negative social, financial and economic impacts for those who can least afford it. And maybe the honourable member for Eltham, who I have a lot of respect for, maybe he doesn't get it. But we're inundated with people in my borough. Some of them support his party, who think it's unfair to come to Bexley when Bexley has good air quality. So does Bromley. So I'm surprised at him. I have no doubt of what he said is correct, because he's a good friend of mine and an honourable man. But I do not believe that there haven't been people in Eltham who haven't said that they think this is unfair to those who are less well off. And I will give way to him.
I'm grateful to him for giving away, but I just want to clarify. I've not said I haven't had any. What I've said is that far more are writing to me about the state of our roads that the government has caused by starving local authorities of investment.
Well, of course, recently there have been given local authorities some more money by the government for just 1 month. But what I would say to him is the fault of Greenwich Council, not the government.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. What the honourable member from Eltham failed to point out is actually the Greenwich Borough, and as my honourable friend rightly points out, it is the local council responsible for the roads, have actually been given over £7.8 million by this government through the recent announcement of the Pothole Fund.
Well, I'm grateful to my neighbour, friend, honourable member for Old Bexley and Sidcup. I believe this ULEZ extension is a disastrous policy and another example of the London Labour Mayor filling his black hole in his finances. But also, this mayor is no friend of the motorists. We have the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, the bus lanes 24/7, and congestion charge already on people who need to use their car. My constituents are very angry about this. I'd like to say that our borough is one of the two in London that doesn't have a tube, doesn't have the opportunity of DLR or tram services. And the Mayor of London has never even looked at this to extend anything as a policy. We only have the southeastern rail services and bus services as our public transport. So it's very nice to say we should go on the tube, but we haven't got one. We have to use the car, as do so many people, to get about. in our area. The lack of public transport services, and quite a number of them, what we do have are rather unreliable, have major implications for my constituents and residents in my borough of Bexley. We therefore are heavily reliant on our cars for various purposes, and we have one of the highest car ownership rates and the lowest sustainable mode share rates in London. And over the last decade, car and van registrations have outstripped the population growth. It's not something we want to do, but we hear all this wonderful about the Mayor of London doing this. In our area, he's done very little. And I made the point in intervention to my honourable friend, the member for Dartford, that he had no mandate to do this. And it's all very well the lady from Nottingham South saying about mandate, but he had no mandate in his last manifesto for this matter. We could have debated it then. And mandate, she was high on the mandates, but didn't mention that at all. Now, the consultation, I believe, was rather a sham when it took place. 2/3 of them, we understand, objected. And they objected for many and various reasons. Because we've heard businesses, because we've heard the case of my honourable friend's constituent, who has to go to visit a relative on a regular basis, and now is having to pay an extra £12.50 every time to visit a relative in Bexley. Now, if the Labour Party say they care about the less well-off, those are disadvantaged, and I do passionately. I believe in social mobility. I believe in the opportunities for people to maximise their opportunity in life. But also, I have to say that this is a tax on these people who cannot afford, and we don't have the public services of transport in Bexley that other London boroughs have. Now, I believe it's also true to say we look at the congestion charge, which has gone up tripled in the last few years. And the non-payment has gone up from 160 to 180. That's more than 2 days' pay for minimum wage earners. And it's reduced to £90 because within 2 weeks, that's still over a day's pay. Now, I think this is very, very unsatisfactory for the less well-off in outer boroughs, the businesses, key workers, pensioners and families. And it's no good, the Labour Party always blaming somebody else, because this is under the Mayor of London, and he is doing that. And the poorest in my borough are the ones who haven't the ability, and £2,000 is a bit of an insult to suggest they can change their car. I'm really disappointed on that. Yes, of course I will.
Gentleman for giving way. And if he were wishing for support to persuade the government to provide additional support for scrappage, as they have around other low-quality air zones in the country for people in London in the outer boroughs, like I represent as well as he does, he would have my support. But does he understand my concern with the case that he's making? Our constituents could have their say on this at the London mayoral elections in just 6 weeks' time. Why then is he seeking to usurp his own candidate and her ability to address this issue? Does he really have so little confidence that he feels that national legislation is needed to undermine his own candidate? Or is it really a sign that he just thinks London recognises the best option is Sadiq Khan?
I mean, I have a lot of respect for the Honourable Lady, and I know her constituency very well, because I grew up in Woodford, so I know the area. My wife was born in you know, no, I don't know your constituency, but Walthamstow my wife was born in, and my son was born in, so just let me finish before you interject. Therefore, I know that part of the world well, and I know her, and I respect her tremendously for the work that she does locally. What I would say to her is, quite definitely, this is a conversation that should have been done before the Mayor implemented this policy. Yeah. We could have then had meetings with government, with outer London member constituencies, and have a discussion about how we could go forward constructively. But it's like he didn't do that. He just had an artificial consultation. I didn't take any notice of the results of what people thought, and we didn't have the discussion. So, one, I think we should have had it beforehand, and what she makes the point about discussing with government and others, but we didn't have it. And this government has bailed out the Mayor of London so much. That's something the opposition don't like to admit.
Over £6 billion.
But the other point is, I'm a big supporter of Susan Hall, and I very much hope she will win when it comes to May the 2nd. But I'm interested. I won't reiterate the point, but it's something very important that a lot of care workers have been in touch with me. Some of them coming in to work in my honourable friend, member for Eltham's constituency, and really very cross that they have to pay this £12.50. And the night staff, when it's more difficult to get night staff, are paying £25. Surely that can't be right. Surely it must be looked at again by the Mayor of London, because these are key workers in our area, dealing with a magnificent job that they do, and I'm always supportive of them. If I could just come to a conclusion, because I don't want to take half an hour and not let other people participate, but I really am disappointed. One, that the opposition members speaking so far have tried to make it a general thing across the country. We're looking at London. We don't now, unfortunately, have the debates that we always used to have, just a debate on London issues on a Thursday. Sorry?
No, carry on.
The point is, that is when we could actually discuss London issues, not Nottingham issues, or not national issues, however important. And air quality is very, very important. But if we're going to do that, as I said about the honourable member for Nottingham South, let's have the figures of how it's improved in inner London. And what about the tube? And what about the pollution that's still there after years of the charge in the centre of London? I welcome my right. I'm going to conclude now. I'm going to conclude. No, I'm going to conclude because I want other people to have a chance. If people take half an hour, it's not very fair on other people who want to speak, whatever they want to say. But I would recommend. I thank my honourable friend who's going to respond on this, and I'm particularly supportive of the Secretary of State for Transport, who I think is doing a brilliant job in the department, and that he is today announced that this bill is something the government will certainly be supporting. So, in conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I want other people to have the chance to speak, I think the ULEZ extension was hurried in without the proper discussion and consultation, without thought to what the consequences were, and my constituents are suffering because of this.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I suppose I have to apologise as a Bristol MP for daring to take place in a debate that is primarily about our capital city, where millions of our constituents will visit and will come here to work and as tourists, and where we all, as a nation, want to see it as a healthy, safe and pleasant place for people to visit, live and work in, regardless of which constituencies we actually represent. And I do want to challenge the honourable member who brought in this bill for saying that this is not an air pollution issue. It's clearly not an air pollution issue from his point of view. We know why he's brought this bill forward today. It's because of the elections coming up on May the 2nd and desperate last-ditch attempt to try to boost the Conservative vote, and I think we know how that will turn out, and perhaps some of the honourable members opposite ought to be out and about talking to voters on the doorstep rather than taking up a time here today if they really want to influence the result of that election. So he may not feel, and he's left the chamber now, he may not feel that talking about ULEZ is an air pollution issue. I very much feel that it is, because that is why we, low emissions is very much about that public health issue. And I have to say, in my role as Shadow Climate Change Minister, I quite often get people coming to me about air pollution as though it's primarily a net zero issue. And we've seen some sort of quite, I think quite depressing attempts to make it part of these cultural anti-woke wars against net zero, to try to sort of say net zero comes at a cost. We saw the Secretary of State for Transport actually buy into the whole conspiracy theory about 15-minute cities at party conference, which again is incredibly depressing. And we do, obviously, reducing emissions from transport is very much part of our ambition to meet net zero, but I would say the immediate driver is the need to clean up our air. In terms of reducing transport emissions, we have heard some mention about the switch to EVs. That is the long-term objective, obviously, that we want to make sure that all the vehicles on our roads do reach safe emission standards. It was very disappointing, therefore, that the government had that rollback on the 2030 ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles. The signal that sent to the market, to consumers, was entirely counterproductive. And actually what has been quite reassuring is that although initially there was some resistance within the car manufacturing trade about a 2030 rather than 2035 target, they then got with the programme, and they were actually very critical of the government for doing that rollback because it affected their sales. They'd made the switch, they're producing, and they're still bound by the ZEV mandate. So they're making the new electric vehicles. What we need to see, and this goes into what was being said about people not being able to afford cleaner vehicles and vehicles that are compliant with the ULEZ zone, the most important thing you can do is to develop a second-hand electric vehicle market as quickly as possible. And you do that by increasing the sale of new. It's about, I think the figure's gone down a bit, but it was in the 80% of new EV sales were fleet vehicles. But we know that they then come on the second-hand market pretty quickly. And we've got to bring down the cost of buying EVs. And we do that by promoting, like to see the honourable member for Bexley Heath, I think, is nodding with that. We don't do that by pushing back the ban to 2035. We need to bring that in now. We also need action on charging infrastructure, and I will say thank you to the government. We've got some new money for charging infrastructure in the west of England. Again, I think Bristol is the best place outside London for EV charging infrastructure. But what is lacking is a national strategy to get charging infrastructure in those places where the market will not meet that need, because there just isn't the, whatever the driving equivalent is of footfall. So particularly in our rural areas that depend on tourism, if you go down to Devon and Cornwall, you can charge Exeter services, and then after that it is pretty difficult to find somewhere to charge your car. So I obviously welcome, particularly as somebody who has an EV and can't charge at home because I live in a block of flats, I very much welcome public charging points in Bristol. I spend far too much time I sit in car parks charging my car, doing my Duolingo, practicing my very, very bad Russian, charging my car, and it's quite sad when constituents spot me doing it. But what we need is yes, we need more charging points in our cities, including London, but we absolutely need a nationwide, it's part of national infrastructure, we've got to roll it out to other parts of the country. Yeah. But what I want to really, as I said, I see the immediate imperative not about that drive to reduce transport emissions and help us get to net zero. It is about air pollution, and we know that it has a significant impact on people's health. We've heard that children are particularly affected, and all of us will know that when I was at school there was one girl in my class with asthma. We know now that if you go into any primary school, I would say even the majority of kids have asthma in inner city areas, and they're more vulnerable to breathing in, the airways are smaller, still developing. They're actually closer to the traffic fumes, being small, they breathe more rapidly, and it also means that they're more likely to develop more serious, well, asthma can be very serious, but more serious lung conditions later in life. We also know that it affects fetuses' lung development in utero and increases the chance of miscarriage. If a mother is exposed to a lot of air pollution during pregnancy, their baby is more likely to be born premature and at a lower weight, and lower birth weight is correlated with development of certain health problems as a child grows up. And I want to pay tribute to groups like Asthma and Lung UK, but also Mums for Lungs that have been doing really good campaigning. In my constituency, we have groups like St George Breathing Better, which was very much behind the push for things like school streets campaigns, where you get a scheme around schools where you don't have those high-emitting vehicles, particularly when children are going in and out of school.
There's a real issue that needs to enter into some of this debate as well. I don't know whether the honourable members found in her constituency. There's a significant rise now in COPD, and the response to that, to be frank, hasn't been particularly helpful in recent years about acknowledgement, proper diagnosis and speed of reaction to it. But again, that relates to the air pollution issue. And I found it in my constituency, there seems to be quite a significant rise of that condition now.
I think the honourable member is right, and I think it's also tied in with poor housing conditions. And we know we've had debates in this place before about making sure homes are fit for human habitation. And there was the young boy recently who tragically died because of the mould in his home. And these things are all connected.
Well, if I could bring on that point.
So I have recently been diagnosed with adult onset asthma in the past few weeks, and adult onset asthma is on the rise, and we know that 30% of cases of adult onset asthma are also triggered by allergies. A lot of this linked to mould within the homes, etc. She's making a really powerful speech on this point, but it does go to the heart of exactly why we need to tackle this issue. It's for everybody in our constituency, young, old, all of us.
And I would actually say, as somebody who suffers from hay fever virtually all year round, it is far worse when you're in, you'd think it would be worse in the countryside. It is terrible when you're in London. Actually, I was in Paris recently in January, and suddenly the hay fever took off, and that is because of air pollution levels. And it's also, you know, it's not lethal in the way that asthma attacks can be, but it's a pretty grim thing to have to live with, and particularly, you know, if you know, it affects people's ability to do their work and to study and everything. So in terms of going back, as I mentioned earlier, the government was forced to act on air pollution. It was taken to court by Client Earth, and I want to pay credit to them for their continuing efforts through the legal system to hold the government to account on meeting its environmental targets or setting environmental targets. And as a result of that court case, Bristol was asked to act. And I've already made the point about the perhaps the irony of, in some cases, demanding local autonomy and not to be told what to do by the Mayor of London, but in Bristol, the Secretary of State telling us we had to do it. But we...
Very briefly, I think she's making a fair point, but I think there has to be the issue of scale, does it not? Because in Bristol, the clean air zone is barely 2 miles, it's about 1 mile by 2, and was specifically introduced so that it was taking into account individuals and businesses, whereas obviously my honourable friend's bill is not seeking to get rid of the congestion zone, it's not even seeking to get rid of ULEZ first expansion, but the second expansion, by contrast to Bristol and its 2 square miles, this is 600 square miles approximately. This is 50 by 50 miles. This is so monumentally bigger than anything else that is contemplated in Bristol or in other cities.
But the mayor, we have a Greater London Assembly and a Mayor of London with devolved powers and Transport for London, so it is looked at on a London-wide basis. And whereas Bristol, as I said, there is an issue with people in places like Bath coming into the city centre, but there's not that interwoven, you know, the boroughs where you can't see the border between one borough and another. There's not that interconnectivity that there is in London. And he is right. I mean, Bristol, we were told that we had to act to bring air pollution levels within legal limits as quickly as possible. But we did go to great lengths with the modelling to try to make sure that some of these concerns about the economic and social impact were dealt with. So we, as the Minister said, making the zone as small as possible was very much one of those factors. The scheme came into effect November 2022. And I think it is relevant to talk about the Bristol scheme because this shows what can be achieved by similar measures in London. The scheme came into effect November 2022, and in January this year we had the first annual report as to how effective it had been. It was judged to have been highly successful. The headline figure was that air pollution across all measured sites had declined by 9.7%. The success of the CAS is obviously measured by whether it lowers nitrogen dioxide levels below the legal limit of 40 micrograms per cubic metre. In November 22, when the scheme was introduced, there were 18 sites across Bristol that were above that legal limit. Just 12 months later, that number was down to just 6 zones. And it was particularly effective outside the Bristol Royal Infirmary and the Children's Hospital, which are bang in the middle of the city centre. Air pollution was down by an incredible 26.9%. And I defy anyone to tell me that improving air quality by such an extent in areas where there are very sick and vulnerable people, including sick children, is a bad thing. It's been really successful. Yeah, there's always
my friend, give way. Does she share my concern that sometimes this is set up as binary, that it's between motorists and everybody else, like the children in the hospital, but actually this is beneficial for all people. And one of the things that came out in the 2018 report is that some of the worst air quality is actually inside the vehicle, and so motorists very directly benefit from improvements in air quality.
Yeah, I remember I was on, I think, 2 of the select committees at the time that took part in that inquiry. I was on the Environmental Audit Committee and the EFRA Select Committee, and it was so difficult actually to try and bring those committees together, but it did produce a really good, significant report, and I think it's something we should still pay heed to when looking at what we do as a House going forward on this issue.
There seems to be a focus on motorists. There are a multiplicity of electric vehicles now. I've got one of them. I used to have an electric bike. I now have an electric scooter, not a sit-down scooter. And I find that in my constituency is particularly effective. To be frank, though, my constituents do frown when I turn up as the MP who they think should be delivering a pizza, but there are a multiplicity of vehicle options now that we have that we can deploy that can tackle some of the air pollution problems, and there needs to be more incentives, I think, from central government to develop that multiplicity.
The right honourable member is absolutely correct. I did have an e-bike. It was actually stolen from inside the House of the Parliament after, it was when the Queen was, you'd think there would be nowhere more secure, but when the Queen was lying in state, whoever acts as her security removed all the bikes and took off a £130 lock with presumably angle grinders or something, and my bike was not seen again. And try explain to that to the insurance company that it was actually people from Buckingham Palace or, I don't know, the Queen's lying in state people that took the lock off, but that's another story. But I think he's entirely right. I mean, when I had the Shadow Green Transport brief, there's so much. I mean, e-bikes, I think, are hugely important in terms of allowing people to just do those longer journeys, and perhaps I couldn't make it up the hills in Bristol without a bit of extra help from an e-bike. But I think in terms of delivery vehicles, and that is one of the issues about deliveries inside these areas covered by zones, if we can have hubs outside the city centres and have electric vans or e-cargo bikes making those deliveries, that could have a huge impact. And obviously everybody delivering the food deliveries and that, they really ought to be in clean modes of transport. I'm conscious of time, so I just want to sort of finish off the final point about the Bristol scheme. There were concerns that it would lead people to take diversions and increase pollution outside the area of the clean air zone, but actually air pollution outside the zone has been measured as down 7.8% as well, because it had encouraged that modal shift in people. I appreciate that it's not always affordable for people to make that shift in vehicles, but it has happened. Another concern opponents raised was that CAS would harm the local economy and communities by discouraging people from coming into the city centre. In fact, it was the opposite. Retail footfall across 4 major retail hotspots in central Bristol actually rose from the previous year. There was also an argument that people would become isolated and stuck at home because they couldn't afford to pay the £9 charge. But again, that wasn't the case. The number of journeys into or through the CAS per month was higher at the end of the year than at the start of the scheme. And the percentage of journeys that were compliant rose every single month. So this is what you'd want to achieve. It's the same way with, say, the landfill tax. The landfill tax isn't about raising money because lots of people are sending stuff to landfill. And actually, effective landfill tax, you want the revenues to go down and down year on year. There's actually an issue about the fact it's not keeping pace with inflation at the moment. But assuming it's effective, the revenues would dwindle because it's the behaviour change that you want to make happen. So nobody, as I said, we didn't think it was... We wouldn't ideally have introduced a clean air zone, but we've made it work. It is also worth noting that the government takes £2 from every £9 CAS charge, which we would very much like to be able to spend in Bristol instead.
Well, when you're talking about the effectiveness of a clean air zone, don't you need to look at... It's quite difficult because it's not whether vehicle numbers or go down, it's whether they are higher or lower than they would have been if you'd done nothing. So when thinking about the effectiveness of the ULEZ in central London, for example, it's modelling what it would have been if you hadn't had ULEZ, rather than looking at just whether the numbers have gone up or gone down.
It is exactly. It's very complicated modelling involved, and I think also if you can use measures like this to take some cars off the road, it increases the attractiveness of public transport, because frankly the buses can get to where they're meant to be without being stuck in traffic. And in my constituency, where there's often not...
She's making the exact argument in support of the bill of having small congestion zones in the centre of cities, allowing the public transport, of course, to do that, but not 600 square mile massive congestion zones in the present expanded ULEZ.
In the context of the Honourable Member Bexley Heath, who was saying that he doesn't have a tube in his part of Greater London, and as though the only alternative to the tube would be driving. And we want to make sure, you know, that across London has a pretty decent bus system, but we need to make sure that people have the alternative. And again, I'm going to say something nice because we've just had confirmation today that First Bus has got funding under the next wave of the Zebra scheme to turn all our buses into electric vehicles. We have been experimenting with biogas, but that will do an awful lot. And actually, we do have some clean, as I said, biogas buses, and the leader of the Labour Party got to drive one on one of his previous visits to the city, which he was like a little boy with a new toy, it has to be said. I think he greatly enjoyed it. But measures like that.
I thank the Honourable for giving way. Given that the evidence shows that ULEZ has actually cut by almost half the pollution in central London, the challenge that the Minister is presenting slightly misreads how people travel around London. And as Outer London MP, I'm acutely conscious that people drive within the borough as well to work, and within and between Outer London boroughs as well. So the idea that you would get the same impact about reducing pollution just by focusing on the centre misses the challenge that we're all trying to address. Nobody's saying this is easy, nobody's saying this isn't controversial, but the reality about air quality, as somebody who has the North Circular running through her constituency and sees that pollution, visibly sees the children struggling and people struggling with the conscience, and I'm sure in South London that is too, we know we have to look at the way in which people travel around London to understand the best way of tackling these issues. That it can't just be an in theory, it has to be an in practice model, does it not?
Yeah, I think the Honourable Member's absolutely right, and she brings me on to my final point, which is, you know, as a Walthamstow MP, she hosts the Mini Holland scheme. I've been to the borough of Waltham Forest to look at what's being done with Mini Holland, which is an example. For, I know, I think the Honourable Member said it's not in her constituency. No, it's in the borough. It's in the borough, yeah. And I've actually cycled around it on an e-bike, and I think it's almost like a weekly occurrence that the transport lead on the council takes people on these tours so that we can learn from what's happened there. And these localised schemes, they can absolutely transform neighbourhoods by designing out some of the traffic, making them really pleasant places to live, building in things like sustainable urban drainage schemes and little areas where people can sit and talk. And I have a livable neighbourhood that is just about to start a pilot in my constituency. And again, the important thing is, you know, engaging the local community, explaining to them how this would work for them, listening to them when they say that this will cause problems in certain areas. And although there has been some opposition, overall, as I said, there's groups like St George Breathing Better, which was a group of parents of children that are suffering because of the air pollution in the city, very much behind that. And I think across the piece, again, I will finish with going back to what I said about the Secretary of State's disappointing remarks about 15-minute cities, as well as these bigger measures like ULEZ to deal with Greater London's transport problems. We also need to be looking at these local solutions like livable neighbourhoods, like school street schemes, like encouraging walking to school, people walking to work, and just making it as easy as possible for people to get around without resorting to their cars. And the final point I would say, this should be about giving elected politicians the right to implement that in consultation with the people they represent.
Yeah.
Steve Tuckle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start this afternoon by thanking my friend, the Honourable Member for Dartford, for bringing this bill to the House, where it gives me great pleasure to offer my support. Members across this House will be in agreement that we want clean air for our residents today and for the generations to come. Across London, we all agree that nobody wants dirty or poor quality air, and in my constituency, in the outer suburbs of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, residents don't want poor quality or dirty air. So we all agree. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, the London Mayor's approach through the expansion of ULEZ to Outer London has nothing to do with air quality. It has everything to do with punishing hard-working families and businesses of all sizes. Several months since the Labour Mayor of London totally ignored Londoners and pressed ahead with expanding the ULEZ tax across Outer London, I, like members from this side, will continue to be contacted by people sharing examples of financial hardships, collapsed businesses and the negative social consequences. And it's here I'd like to draw on some of the specifics within the bill as it stands that go some way, I believe, in rectifying what is a blatant money grab. On calling for the Secretary of State for Transport's consent for any expansion of the ULEZ and the ULEZ boundaries once they've been amended as per the bill, and a number of important qualifications are also spelt out. Amongst them is whether what is proposed changes are in accordance with the manifesto commitment by the Mayor of London and the most recent mayoral election. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Mayor of London made no mention of ULEZ expansion in his manifesto, and he certainly made no mention of ULEZ expansion to the people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. But that's not all. Mr Deputy Speaker, the ULEZ expansion's democratic deficit doesn't stop there. Along the lack of any mention of ULEZ in his manifesto, the Mayor of London embarked on a consultation which, due to a raft of allegations, including the weighting given to particular consultation responses, amongst other issues, has left multiple questions about its validity. This is something that I'm also glad to see is confronted by today's bill, with the Secretary of State having to consider responses to any consultation conducted through the proposed changes. If the Mayor had put more time and effort into speaking with residents across Outer London and indeed Uxbridge and South Ruislip, he would have understood that they were not far-right conspiracy theorists. These hard-working families and business owners were ignored and continue to be ignored. Why did the Mayor of London not consider using funds to bring around a new green fleet of buses, electrify the taxi network, plant more trees and ensure that the tube runs on much cleaner energy, and let's not forget a properly funded scrappage scheme? These alternatives would have produced real binding changes to people's lives, not just how they travel around Outer London, but interact with their communities and their surroundings. Mr Deputy Speaker, rather than explore sensible, common sense alternatives, the Mayor of London chose to spend hundreds of millions of pounds on ULEZ enforcement cameras. Uxbridge and South Ruislip is heavily reliant on car usage due to the nature of our Outer London geography. The people I have the privilege of representing could opt to use public transport, but we see how the Mayor of London is decimating local bus services and continues to preside over the ongoing catastrophic failure of the Central Line. Emails and social media comments are flooding in from constituents who are rightly angry over an unacceptable and unreliable public transport service. So why force ULEZ expansion to areas with minimal and long-term unreliable public transport without first rectifying those issues? Why not invest into more public transport network so that people can rely on it and then make the decision to make the switch? Why then, Mr Deputy Speaker, would he push ahead with expansion first? The answers are clear: to continue ignoring hard-working Londoners and punish them with destructive money grab thinly disguised as an environmental strategy with little or no substance. I know all too well about the anger and frustration felt by ordinary hard-working people in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and indeed across Outer London, towards this Mayor's cynical money grab. Mr Deputy Speaker, I stated in my maiden speech in this place that I stand here now, no longer the local candidate, but as a Member of Parliament, still determined to fight the Mayor of London's money grab and reduce the burden being placed on my residents and local businesses. Those words still ring true. Mr Deputy Speaker, only this week, the Mayor of London made comments citing the sky didn't fall in following the expansion of ULEZ. Well, the sky did fall in for businesses that can no longer afford to trade and households who have incurred financial hardships thanks to the expansion of ULEZ. Flippant and arrogant comments cement the view that the Mayor of London is out of touch with hard-working Londoners. Mr Deputy Speaker, in concluding, this bill has my full support as it looks to vary ULEZ boundaries and ensure safeguards are in place for over